Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live, talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynn at pghcitypaper.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
God, I keep yawning. I can't stop yawning. It would not be, I think, good to open the show with me with my mouth agape. Anyway, hi, how you doing? It is nearing the end of July. It's the 25th. How'd that happen? And here we are again. So, I saw a good movie yesterday. The good movies now are generally little independent movies where you don't have violence. There's no violence. There's no sex. There's no car chases. There's not even a hell of a lot of dialogue. But it's wonderful. And it's called Leave No Trace. It's a woman director whose name escapes me, who also did a highly acclaimed independent film some years back called I had it just a minute ago. Called about some real down and out. I think it's where we first got to know this marvelous actress, Deborah Granick is the director. And I don't know why the hell I'm not thinking of that initial movie of hers, at least when we came to is there bones in the title? Yeah. God. Hello and welcome to Watch the Doddering Old Lady Try to Remember Names. Winter's Bone. All right. Anyway, I really recommend it if you're a thoughtful human being. I don't see how you wouldn't like it. Very powerful, wonderful movie. I won't tell you much. It's about a father and a daughter, teenage daughter, living off the grid, essentially homeless, but really smart about making it, just living in a forest. And the love between them, their grit, his difficulties, obviously a result of post-traumatic stress syndrome in some war. I'm going to assume Afghanistan. And really, really just beautifully done. I don't think there's a false note in it. So I do recommend it. I never even heard of it, and I felt like a movie yesterday. I felt like Escape, and this was just what the doctor ordered. Anyway, so there's that. I want to make note, although I'm fearful of doing so because it seems like every time I do, it's a curse. But I do want to note something I'm sure you've noted, which is the amazing Pittsburgh Pirates at the moment. Wow. It's like they're on fire. It's amazing. What are they at now? 12 games in a row? And they're not just winning by a little. They're just decimating the competition. Just how the hell? Anyway, it's fun when it's happening, isn't it? And I'm happy for them. I felt real sorry for the players. When I say them, I'm never talking about the management. I like Clint Hurdle, but I'm not talking about Nutting, the owner, and the management. Mostly the owner, I guess. But I feel for the players. And I'm happy for them. So, in my continuing efforts to figure out how to keep my head and keep my health while living in this unreal, real world, I have a few things here that I want to throw out. One is courtesy of one of you, Dorothea, and I thank you. These are suggestions from former Labor Secretary Robert Reich. He was Labor Secretary under Bill Clinton. And his suggestions for us all. I don't necessarily agree with all of them, but I don't have a violent disagreement with any. And I think some are really, really good. He says, number one, do not use the president's surname. I suppose that's just because he so infuses everything, that those 5 letters, that maybe it's best to not say it even. But I don't think that's why. And also, he loves it being said. But he says to refer to this always as the GOP administration. Make sure the Republicans get targeted. And but then he says it's really not an administration. Remember, it's a regime, and he is not acting alone. So, yeah, I think those things are, and this is how, like, when you're talking to people about what's happening, don't say his damn name, call it a regime, pin it on the Republicans, the enablers, and he says don't waste your time arguing with people who support him. It's just totally a waste of time. It doesn't work. And here's a good one that we forget. Focus on his policies. Focus on what he's doing and not his mental state, not his orangeness. And here's the one where we always stumble. Keep the message positive. And the reason Reich says is because the people who support this regime and the regime itself want Americans to keep a high level of anger and fear, because that is the soil that they grow their dark policies in. Don't add to it. And here's another one we don't do too well on. At least I don't. He says, no more helpless or hopeless talk. I mean, that goes without saying. I mean, you cannot enlist people in the good fight if you're self-mired in depression and hopelessness, right? So, positive message, focus on policies, don't sound like this is some insurmountable thing. And also, out of the blue, he says, support the arts and artists, which I find interesting, very interesting, and I agree completely. Because the other side does not. There is no art on the other side. And arts and artists in times like these are always on the side of resistance. Even if I don't like that term. And then another very important thing, he says, make sure you're not spreading fake news. Don't be sending stuff on until you have checked it out. We all make the mistake. Let's really try not to make it very often. And his big one is take care of yourself. which is what I was ranting about yesterday. I mean, you're no good in the battle if you're depressed and despairing and, and emotionally distraught. You have to take care of yourself. Okay, so I think those are all really great. And I thank you for that. And on that positive note, I wanted to share another little list that someone who wrote to the New York Times came up with. I really liked. And this goes back to what I was talking about yesterday about tarring everybody who's a blue-collar worker or who's an angry white male as consequently then, of course, being a regime supporter. It's not, it's stupid, it's untrue. And a woman named Ann Diamond wrote this to the New York Times. And it's really, I mean, this is a way to start a conversation, maybe. Not again this is for people who are wavering. Believe it or not, there are still people in the middle in this most partisan of times. There are, and where did I see the latest poll, the latest Wall Street NBC poll says, what is it? 9%. But I find that amazing. I mean, that 9% of all voters say they are neutral about Trump. I mean, it amazes me that anybody would not be either or I mean, it just amazes me. But so there's a good, it's not a, it's single digit, but it's still, there are people out there. So if you're talking to those folks, it's really good to start with things that we all can agree on. And this Ann Diamond came up with a list. And she said, it seems to me that this list, which incorporates ideas that under any normal administration would seem obvious. It's sort of like bedrock values that, don't we all agree to this? Okay, statement number one. We deserve a president who tells the truth. Can we all agree with that? I don't know about the deserve part, because I think we got what we deserved. But we can all agree that we would like a president who speaks the truth. And her second statement that she thinks anyone would agree with is cabinet secretaries should be advocates for their agency. Now, obviously, that'll turn a lot of Republicans off because, as I've always said, Republicans always put the exact opposite of advocates into cabinet offices. They put people who will destroy the very office that they have, that they are now leading. So, but if we're not living in an upside-down world, I think we should all be able to agree that you would appoint someone who cares about the environment as the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, somebody who cares about workers to be the head of the Department of Labor, somebody committed to public education who, is the education secretary. You get my point. And she said, here's another one. Americans want clean air and water, and Americans believe in climate change. I mean, this is, it's true. Vast majority of Americans believe in climate change, and you tell me, is there anybody you know who doesn't want clean air and clean water? Okay. Every citizen should be encouraged to vote. We agree on that? You know, it's interesting because obviously this list is standing in stark contrast to the Republican agenda. But I think she lays it out pretty well. No child should go to bed hungry. Canada and Mexico are not our enemies. Russia is not our friend. These are statements that just 2-3 years ago would not be, I mean, you'd say, well, yeah, the sky is blue. 1 and 1 is 2. What are you even talking about here? The press is not the enemy. Children belong with their parents. Huh. Okay, so she says if we can agree on these things, Americans should be voting in record numbers. And they should be voting in record numbers, clearly, for Democrats. Because supporters of the Republican Party now clearly don't agree with this stuff, or people who support this president. So, whatever. There's that. I got 2 quotes I wanted to share with you. One is from a guy I always made fun of, Hubert Humphrey. I just didn't like his looks. Isn't that awful? How, and it's true of human bias, that if somebody just looks in a way, their face you don't like for whatever reason, it wasn't his fault. But, and then of course, unfortunately, he was this sort of happy-go-lucky. I just didn't like him. And it was at a point in my life where I was filled with rage. And he was not a rageful person in any way. And of course, from a distance now, as I look back on him, I know he was a good man. Pretty damn good guy. Hubert Humphrey. I believe he'd been the governor of Minnesota, and then he became the senator from Minnesota, and then he became Lyndon Johnson's vice president. He said this: "It is always a risk to speak to the press. They are likely to report what you say." And there it is. And invariably when who says fake news, he's talking about something he in fact said. And the other quote I love is from Harlan Ellison, and it is who recently died, right? Yeah. "The 2 most common elements in the universe are hydrogen and stupidity." I want to talk a little bit about human nature here. 2 stories that I think are sort of about human nature. One has to do with a soccer player in Germany. Not that I'm into soccer. But this is a guy, and I don't know how to pronounce his name, Mesut Ozil. And he was Player of the Year 5 times in Germany. He was born in Germany of Turkish parents who were immigrants to Germany, but he is full-blooded German. And he just quit the team. And he quit because he said he couldn't handle the bigotry and the hypocrisy. And he was getting a lot of bad press. First of all, the German team didn't fare very well in the recent championship series. And also, he had a picture taken with the president of Turkey, who we know is a tyrannical jerk who's pretty much squelched the budding democracy in that land. It's more than budding. It was, we thought, pretty much taken hold. And he had a picture taken with Erdogan. I don't know the circumstances. I don't know if it was showing that he supported Erdogan or it just showed that, you know, here's the president of Turkey. That's my parents' homeland and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, all hell broke loose. He was totally criticized. And he was just sick and tired of all of it. So he quit. Said to hell with you all. And here is what he said. He said, and this is a statement I found to be so true, I'm sure. He said, I am a German when we win, but I am an immigrant when we lose. And what he finally couldn't take anymore is being a hero to the German people, a representative of the German nation on the soccer team whenever they were winning. And if he had a bad season, he had a bad game, all of a sudden, how quickly he goes from hero and representative of the German nation to a damn Turkish immigrant, essentially. Not one of us. He's not one of us. And he was just sick and tired of being buffeted between, oh, you wonderful German, you, to you slimy immigrant. And this is, let's acknowledge this. This is something that human beings do all the time. You name a family in which one of the parents hasn't said at some point, oh, speaking of the kids, when when they do something right, they're your kids. When they do something wrong, they're my kids, right? Same kind of a thing. We always want to embrace winners, the good ones, something to be proud of. And when someone who's clearly connected to us does bad, there's an effort to sort of foist them off on somebody else. It's human nature. But in this case, you see the hurt and the pain that comes with this. And here is a quote from Albert Einstein, who, of course, was an immigrant himself. In 1922, and this is before his theory of relativity was accepted. In 1922, Albert Einstein said in Paris, while giving a speech there, quote, "If my theory of relativity is proven successful, Germany will claim me as a German, and France will declare that I am a citizen of the world. Should my theory prove untrue, France will say that I am a German, and Germany will declare I am a Jew." Yeah, this we know. Human nature. It's what we do all the time. I mean, in Pittsburgh, I see it most as much as I've seen it anywhere that I've ever lived, is that anyone who we have any claim on, who's famous, we claim. And I did it just the other day in the obit of the day, Adrian Cronauer, and said he was born in Pittsburgh. He went to the University of Pittsburgh. He listened to Reed Cordick. And it's a way of claiming, having a little of whatever luster they have, somehow rub off on us, that somehow we are basking in the same glow. Oh, yeah, Adrian Cronauer, knew him well. That kind of a thing. But the minute, this person who you want to claim does something horrible, or you're ashamed of, or embarrassed by, or you don't like, oh, how quickly, if possible, they can be cast out. Human nature. It was noted, this same article where I saw this also noted how, the French team winning the World Cup. If you'd shown anyone a picture of the team, you would say, oh, wow, what African team won? Because it looked, with the exception of one or two, just solid Africans, which is why Trevor Noah did say Africa apparently won the World Cup, to which the French took great umbrage. But, when you think of France, you don't think of all these black Africans. Now, they will be French heroes, right? They represent France. Until they don't. Until you see that most immigrants, most blacks in France don't live in the better neighborhoods, don't get ahead, you know what I mean? But, oh, boy, that's our team. Just saying. Here's another thing I thought of. I'm so happy that those boys in Thailand lived. It sure didn't seem like they would. And then they did. And it was a real feel-good story for a world that really wanted one. And I just want to say that I so fear for them again. And my fear now, I feel, is well placed. Because the minute they became this huge story, their lives changed dramatically, as we know. They've now all, with the exception of one who was Christian, have, done this, are doing this novice monk thing, which is really a lovely thing to do. What a wonderful Buddhist tradition. It's a way to signify an attempt to repay a debt, to spend 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever, in prayer, contemplation, charitable work, shaved head, as a monk, to honor somebody, to repay a debt. And of course, they have a huge debt, which they could never really repay. But they are doing this because of the death of the Thai Navy SEAL, one of the rescuers, and the only person who did die. was a lovely thing they're doing. But as they were marching to the monastery the other day, heads bowed, trying to do this thing, the streets were lined with screaming fans. So much so that one of the monks who was a leader had to get on a loudspeaker and say, "It is enough. This is a somber ritual. Can we have some respect?" So what I want to say is these boys now are in a three-ring circus. And just because they've been rescued does not alter the fact that they have become players in a three-ring circus. And their lives will never be the same. They will be, after their stay in the monastery, let loose in a world that will want to eat them alive. Because that's the world we live in. There will be people who want to be near them, befriend them, buy them, because for the same reason before. They are now celebrities. They have luster, and people want to bathe in the glow, to be close. There will be people dangling lots of money in front of them for books, for movies, for endorsements, for this, for that. Oh, people will come bearing gifts. And these are boys from poor families, some of them stateless. They don't have a chance with the vultures that are going to be circling them now. We wanted them rescued. Be careful what you wish for, because we rescued them, and now I am telling you, because I know I've lived long enough to see it happen over and over and over again. They will be eaten alive. I can only hope that some of them are able to resist, are able to maintain. Their kids are able to somehow maintain a real life. Will somehow be able to control the maelstrom they find themselves in. I fear for them. Is what I wanted to say. Milton says, your story of the German soccer player reminds me of the first lesson I ever learned about race and sportsmanship. When I was in second grade, the Steelers were at the height of their success as a Super Bowl winning powerhouse. I noticed then that whenever Franco Harris had a great game, he was the leader of Franco's Italian army. When he gained less than 100 yards or gave up a fumble at a crucial point, Franco was a lazy N-word who was worthless and should be traded. I learned very early in life that when it comes to race, love and adulation are movable feasts. Sadly, no more true than in my beloved hometown. And Margaret says, you know, Tiger Woods had the same kind of problem as well. He was our hero when he was on top, and then he wasn't. So, trying to keep my Twitter under some control, but I wanted to just, because somebody did tweet something. It's an Orwell quote. That'd be George. It is a quote from his rather well-known book, 1984, which he wrote well before 1984 when he assumed this horrible future we could be heading into. And he said this in 1984 about the ruling party. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. Reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. If you see it, if you hear it, that doesn't matter. Listen to what we tell you. And Orwell says this was the final, most essential command in his nightmare dystopia, right? I want to quote the President of the United States from yesterday. Stick with us. Don't believe the crap you see from these people, pointing to the reporters. The fake news. What you are seeing and what you are reading is not what's happening. What you are seeing and what you are reading is not happening. That's Donald Trump. And here's George Orwell. Reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. That was the final, most essential command. Now, yesterday, how'd this come up? Speaking with Clarence, we talked about the piece that was written by a Silicon Valley gazillionaire, in which he warned his fellow gazillionaires that the pitchforks are coming. And I want to thank Milton for sending me the article, which I reread last night. And, yep, that's the one I read. And the guy's name is Nick Hanauer. And he wrote it as a memo to, quote, my fellow zillionaires. You know, yesterday, before we remembered who this guy was, I think I said zillionaires or gazillionaires, and that's what he does too. Memo to my fellow zillionaires. And if I may, can I read some of it to you? Because I think it's really good. And as we said yesterday, he also has done a TED Talk. I'm not going to do the whole thing. It's pretty long. First of all, he represents himself to his fellow zillionaires, whether they know him or not, as one of the 0.01%. And he says, and a proud and unapologetic capitalist. And then he gives of his bona fides. Is that how it's pronounced? I have founded, co-founded, and funded more than 30 companies. From itsy-bitsy ones like the nightclub I started in my 20s to giant ones like Amazon.com, for which I was the first non-family investor. I founded an internet advertising company that was sold to Microsoft in 2007 for $6.4 billion in cash. I own a bank. I tell you all this, he says to his fellow zillionaires, to demonstrate that in many ways I'm no different from you. Like you, I have been rewarded obscenely for my success with a life that the other 99.99% of Americans can't even imagine. In 92, I was selling pillows to retail stores across the country. And the internet was some clunky kind of novelty that you hooked up to with a loud squawk. But I saw pretty quickly, even back then, that many of my pillow buying customers, the big department store chains, were already doomed. I knew that as soon as that internet thing became fast and trustworthy enough, and I felt that time was not far off, that people were going to shop online like crazy. Realizing that, seeing over the horizon a little faster than the next guy was the strategic part of my success. The lucky part was that I had a friend named Jeff Bezos. Bezos, I guess is how he pronounces it. So I helped underwrite his tiny startup internet bookseller. And now I own a very large yacht. But let's speak frankly to each other, he says to the zillionaires. I'm not the smartest guy you ever met, or the hardest working. I was a mediocre student. I'm not technical at all. I can't write a word of code. What sets me apart is a tolerance for risk and an intuition about what will happen in the future. Seeing where things are headed is the essence of entrepreneurship. And what do I see in our future now? I see pitchforks. I almost said I see dead people. I see pitchforks. And then he goes on to say, hey, look, guys. The divide now between us and the have-nots is getting worse, and it's getting worse really, really fast. And then he throws some statistics at them. And then he says this, but the problem isn't that we have inequality. Some inequality is intrinsic to any high-functioning capitalist economy. The problem is that inequality is at historically high levels and getting worse every day. Our country is rapidly becoming less a capitalist society and more a feudal society. And unless our policies change dramatically, the middle class will just disappear. And we will be back to late 18th century France before the revolution. And so I have a message for my fellow filthy rich, for all of us who live in our gated bubble worlds. Wake up. It ain't gonna last. Now remember, this is a guy who says why I'm as rich as I am is I have an ability to see beyond the horizon. And he sees pitchforks. He says no society can sustain this kind of rising inequality. In fact, there is no example in human history where wealth accumulated like this and the pitchforks didn't eventually come out. You show me a highly unequal society, and I will show you a police state or an uprising. There are no counter examples, none. So it's not if, it's when. Okay, I want to it goes on and saying that we gotta share some stuff here. We gotta, whatever. But I think the first time I read this, I sort of skipped over that last sentence the last paragraph I read, because I want to point something out that sort of chilled my blood when I reread this last night. He points out that throughout human history, if you get this level of wealth inequality, that there are only two things that can happen: pitchforks or a police state. And the title of this was always "The Pitchforks Are Coming." The title was never "The Police State is Coming." And I want to suggest that the powerful are standing behind the current president because it appears he is willing to institute, essentially, a police state. And consequently, they'd be able to keep their wealth and there wouldn't be pitchforks. Because when I can lift a quote from 1984 and it totally is represented in a quote in the paper today from a presidential speech yesterday, I think that it's not the pitchforks the way we are heading. I think it's the police state. And I think this guy figures it's the pitchforks too. And in that regard, I think he might be wrong. Anyway, his memo to his fellow zillionaires had absolutely no impact at all on them. Bezos got richer, greedier, put more family businesses out of business. We see the power now of Facebook, of Google, and how it can be used by police states. So I just want to say, I thought, as I reread that it was very, very sobering. I can't pretend to know if what he is saying is correct historically, that there are only two outcomes when a society becomes as unequal as ours is. The people either rise up, or the government, which represents the lords, because he says we're in a feudal society right now, or the government, which represents the lords, clamps down. That's the only possibilities. Rise up or clamp down. The bottom rises or the top clamps down. That's what he says is the only historical possibilities. And I find that sobering. So, I'm just throwing it out there for you. Back to that poll I previously mentioned, the Wall Street Journal, NBC News poll. It really is remarkable, the solid support that Trump has of his own party members. Just incredible. 88% of people who say I'm a Republican. 88% are behind him every bit of the way. And the number who say they strongly approve, I mean the highest value, is 30%. 30%. Okay, so 30% absolutely unmovable. 80, and that's all Americans. 88% of all Republicans. And that tells us that we are not in any way, not that this is news, a united states. Not at all. We are really divided. The good news is that 30% or 30% of all Americans strongly approving, and add another, maybe gets up to close to 40 of strongly and just approving. The fact is that is a minority. The problem is that our side doesn't hold the other 60%. As I said to you earlier, there's a 9%. Those are the guys. Those 9% who must be brain dead. I cannot for the life of me figure out how you wouldn't have an opinion either way. But there they are. And those are the guys that we got to win over. Otherwise, it's really too close for comfort, this division. It's way too close. And I'll read you just one other little paragraph here from, it says the core Trump support group combines two groups, one of which are people who are drawn to him for economic reasons. People who totally believe that the global economy and all the new rules it brings with it have stacked the deck against them. Okay. Now, I will argue that in that regard, I think they're correct. The global economy has harmed millions upon millions upon millions of American workers because we can't compete with all the people in the world willing to work for a lot less. So they say Trump's support comes from people like that, who Democrats, if they learn how to package their message, should be able to get to. And then there's the other group that I think you can't get to because in many respects we don't want them. And that's the people who are drawn to Trump for cultural reasons, for people who hate the elites, think immigrants are not good, and that people like me are hijacking traditional values and stuff like that. Those people we cannot reach. But the people who he managed to bamboozle, who see themselves losing out in this global economy, those are people that Democrats should definitely reach. We have a caller. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. I don't like to call 2 days in a row. But
That's okay, Clarence.
Because, the 88%, is that the number you gave? That,
Of Republicans, people who say, I am a Republican, 88% of them. Totally.
Here's the good news on that. What I've read a couple of times is that people who call themselves Republicans is diminishing.
Is really diminishing. That is true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, and that's where the where it sounds worse than what it actually is.
So it's 88% of an already minority of Americans, and it's 88% of a diminishing minority.
Exactly.
Right.
Who say they support Trump.
Right.
And I think the word, did you say strongly supports Trump?
No, strongly
strongly
support. If you ask
support.
all Americans, and now we're getting away from the party, strongly support all Americans, it's 30%.
And see, that's one of those questions too. There could be people who support Trump, but they don't strongly support Trump. You know what I mean? That's one of those questions where that's why I hate to take polls when they call me, because of the way they phrase the question.
Right.
I would, so.
But I can't. I mean, anybody who would say they support him.
I don't get it. I can't even, imagine. That's when I go back. I don't ask why. I ask how.
Yeah.
How do these people come to this conclusion? And normally they're, and it's they're fearful for some reason. It could be, some black kid beat him up in high school.
Who the hell knows?
That got to that point, or, and I think the biggest thing, of course, is fear. Fear.
Absolutely.
And that's when people say, well, I said it's that fear, and I said, well, you're tacitly making an admission that you're a white supremacist. If you have a fear of losing because minorities, women, and all that kind of good stuff are making gains, there's a tacit admission that you feel superior, that these people are getting something that they don't deserve.
That's exactly right.
You deserve it.
That's exactly right. And so interesting that Trump now, because is going to be throwing money at some of these people to keep them on board while his policies harm them, just to tide them over till the midterm elections. So he's using billions of our dollars to buy their continued loyalty. It's really something.
Yeah, all you need are smart, easy to understand arguments for Democrats to use that right there as a rallying cry or something like that.
Yeah.
To get these people back. To get these people back. That they were played.
Let's.
And that. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Let's hope. I thank you, Clarence. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to go. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Just want to get to emails in. Brian says, you got capitalism, which makes very few very rich. That's what we got. I call it, he says, crapitalism, where the workers who make these assholes rich get crapped on. The face of crapitalism is Mr. Bankruptcy himself, Donald Trump. Kathleen says, yours are excellent insights. The Zillionaires memo is absolutely on target. Since our political scene has been in such hateful disarray, I've told anyone who will listen to remember the French Revolution. But now I think I was wrong. Americans and our leaders, as well as much of our press, appear to me to be brain dead, witless, dull. That's not a criticism, it's an observation. I can't imagine where a French Revolution would rise from. It's more likely that everyone will just submit to this inequality, go after whatever they can get, and live behind locked doors. Jeez. Well, let's hope, Kathleen, that is not the case. Revolution can come from the people. It really can. Enough of the people. And then politicians, fearful of the people, will jump on board. That's how these things happen, right? I would not despair that is not a possibility. It just seems to me that right now the powers that be are clearly trying to go the other way to retain their wealth and their position, which is clamp down police state, authoritarianism of a feudal society. So, sharpen up your pitchforks. That's all I got to say. Okay. And thanks for being there, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.